So if I give you a glass of water and then I piss in it and then I add sugar, it doesn't remove the piss. These are both independent things. This is what tends to happen. This is what we don't understand about trauma. Removing the piss requires removing the piss. No amount of sugar will take it out of the drink. Okay? So this is mistake number one. No amount of building something good will remove something bad. Okay? So healing, and it's also like, if I break a leg, no amount of bench press will heal my leg. Like I can build as much as I want to. I can fix my hair. I can brush my teeth, but the leg is broken. The leg is broken. Same is true of the mind. Okay? Second thing is what happens is we have our consciousness is divided. Now we're going to get kind of technical and off the rails. So we have all of these dormant pieces of our consciousness that activate in certain situations. One of the biggest mistakes we make about healing is we look at what is active in our mind 90% of the time, and we assume that the injury is no longer there. That's not the case. Does that make sense?
100%.
Right? So the injury just goes dormant. Then there are certain things that happen that can trigger that injury. That's what we call triggers, right? So if I'm traumatized, if we look at PTSD and I've been traumatized by, a bomb going off, literally, my brain has certain circuits that scans my perceptual environment and decides what to activate. So there are ways stillness makes you feel small. And fuck you if you're ever going to be small again. Never again, never again, never again. I would bet money that if you sit by yourself and you're not occupied, right? That's why you have to watch crime shows. Because if you don't watch crime shows, you're going to be still. And if you're still, that's unacceptable. Okay? Mm-hmm. So dormant things have to be healed where they belong. And this is where we can look at the science of healing trauma. So here are the steps. First thing is safety, so that we can get neuroplasticity. Second thing is emotional awareness and emotional regulation. And this allows us for number 3, which is really important, which is identity. So if we look at our human sense of identity, how do you develop an identity? So identity requires a timeline.
Okay.
Now, the interesting thing is if we look at the formative moments of your life, they all have emotion. Mm-hmm. So this is what's really important. If you have an identity that is bad in any way, you can never change that identity without emotions. Mm. So who we are is a narrative of our most emotional experiences. There are all of these moments, these powerful emotional moments. So if your emotions are dulled by drugs, by technology, by pornography, by watching serial killer shows, you will never change who you are. It is impossible. The neuroscience of your identity and development requires emotional experience. Okay? So with trauma, that's the next thing that happens. Once we have access to emotions, then we can become someone else. Now, the problem with trauma is that before we become someone else, the beliefs we have about ourselves become our destiny. And that's not like some, spiritual, get connected with you. This is like fucking science, right? If you believe you are a loser, the empathic circuits of other people's brains will detect that in you and they will treat you like a loser. You carry who you are with you. That's why you get into failed relationship number 1, failed relationship number 2, failed relationship number 3 until you changed. And when you change, your sense of identity changes, then your future will change. The last thing to do is on a more microscopic level, look at these responses within yourself. So you asked me at the very beginning of the podcast, and now we're coming full circle. How do you start understanding yourself? So you look at the drives within yourself, right? How do you start? So what I would say is sit for 5 minutes, 15 minutes. Sometimes we'll tell people to stare at a wall for an hour. And just look at what on earth goes on inside you. You will discover that it is a zoo of thoughts, feelings, emotions, drives, panics, worries, distractions. Your internal environment is such a mess. So what we need to do is just kind of calm that stuff down by just letting it kind of run out of steam. So this is a principle of the mind that if we feed our mind, it'll continue to grow. But what we need to do is just let it run out of steam. So just sit and do nothing for a while. People don't realize the part of our brain that exerts willpower has something to do with this part of our brain called the anterior cingulate cortex. The anterior cingulate cortex is a piece of where willpower comes from, but it is also the part of our brain that monitors conflict. So willpower and monitoring a conflict are actually technically the same thing. The same part of the brain activates. And if you pay attention to your own internal experience, what you'll realize is anytime you're using willpower, there's an internal struggle that you are paying attention to. It's like, I don't want to order chicken. I want to order fried chicken. So there's a monitoring of the conflict that goes on. That's anytime you're exerting willpower, there's this thing this way and this thing this way, but you are aware of it. You can't exert willpower if you're behaving automatically, right? That's why it's so easy to get lost in doom scrolling, because you're not even aware of what you're doing before, and then 4 hours have gone by and you're like, what? What happened? You're not aware. So this is the crazy thing from a neuroscientific perspective, and this is what the yogis will teach as well. Awareness is willpower. Tons of addicts, they come up for air. And maybe you've done this, and maybe people at home have done this. You go on this binge and then you come up for air and you're like, what have I been doing for a couple of days? What have I been doing for a couple of hours? Then you gain that awareness again. So the more that you are aware in the present moment, the more your problems will literally melt away. It's like crazy. I don't quite know how it works, but this is what yoga teaches you, that as you are aware, you stop rejecting things, you start accepting things, you focus on the present. All the stuff that everyone talks about is actually rooted in awareness. And we live in a society where if I say you don't need habits, you don't need willpower, you don't need discipline, all you need is awareness, people will reject me. That doesn't mean it isn't true. And the more that you explore awareness, the more you will realize, like I used to think it was like 50-50. I'm now at like 90% of the problem is awareness. And that's weird. But
no, but does that, because we tend to look for solutions that involve action. Mm-hmm. Like, buy that thing, make that list, go to that meeting, watch that thing. It's all about action as a solution to our problems. So I was expecting you to tell me that the solution to everything we've discussed here is like this 7-step process of like, write this thing down, say this thing, and
Okay, so let's understand this, okay? You don't need to focus on the action. It's the internal thing that drives you like a fucking slave that is responsible for your success. If someone else wants a fraction of what you have, 10% of what you have, they don't need to duplicate your actions. They need to duplicate what's going on the inside. This is exactly my point.
They need your toxic fuel.
Yeah. Toxic fuel is on the path to happiness, right?
Yeah.
So the stages of unhappiness to happiness. There's unhappy in all situations, unhappy in some situations, happy in some situations, happy in most situations, and then moksha, enlightenment, mukti is happiness in all situations. Happiness that is completely independent of your circumstances. That's the stage that you're at. Because we can make you unhappy very, very easily.
Yeah, that's true.
Right?
Yeah.
And it kind of makes sense. This is what happens is we start to craft a life that makes us happy. That's the first step. Totally good. But then what happens is that we are still dependent on the external life for our happiness. And that will never work 100%.